The sound of wagon wheels crunching through gravel broke the dawn silence as the caravan of settlers made its way across the barren Colorado landscape in 1876. Among them, a burlap sack shifted in the back of the final wagon, the subtle movement almost imperceptible against the jolting of the rough terrain. Preston Newell pulled his horse to a stop, squinting against the rising sun. At 26, he'd spent half his life working cattle drives, his skin weathered beyond his years, his hands calloused from rope and reins. Something about that last wagon didn't sit right with him. The family driving it had joined their group 3 days back, keeping mostly to themselves, and Preston had noticed their furtive glances and hushed conversations. "Mr. Cooper," he called out, trotting his horse toward the lead wagon. "Mind if I check something with the Hendersons back there?" "Something ain't right." Cooper, the wagon master, nodded without slowing. "Make it quick, Newell. We need to make the crossing before midday." Preston circled back, the familiar weight of his Colt revolver at his hip offering some comfort as he approached the Henderson wagon. "Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened when she saw him, and her husband's grip tightened visibly on the reins. "Morning," Preston tipped his hat. "Noticed something shifting in your load back there. Mind if I take a look?" "Just supplies," Henderson answered too quickly. "Probably a loose crate." Preston maintained his easy smile, but his eyes hardened. "Won't take but a moment to check." Without waiting for permission, he dismounted and walked to the back of the wagon. The canvas cover was tied down tight, but he could see where it bulged oddly. With a quick movement, he flipped back the edge of the cover. What he saw made his blood run cold. A human form, bound at the wrists and ankles with a burlap sack secured over the head. The figure was small, dressed in a tattered dress. A woman, or worse, a girl. "What in God's name?" Preston's hand moved to his gun. Henderson leapt from the wagon's seat, a shotgun suddenly in his hands. "This ain't your business, Cowboy. She's property fair and square." Preston didn't hesitate. His gun cleared leather before Henderson could aim, the shot catching the man in the shoulder and spinning him to the ground. Mrs. Henderson screamed, scrambling for her husband's fallen weapon, but Preston kicked it away. "Cooper," he shouted, his voice carrying across the prairie. "Need some help back here." Within minutes, the caravan had stopped, men with rifles surrounding the Hendersons while Preston carefully approached the bound figure. With gentle hands, he pulled off the burlap sack, and what he saw made his throat tighten. A young woman, perhaps 19 or 20, blinked against the sudden light. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut, dried blood caked at the corner of her mouth. But it was her eyes deep green and filled with such terror and hopelessness that struck him like a physical blow. Preston felt moisture on his cheeks and realized with surprise that he was weeping. "You're safe now," he whispered, working to untie her bonds. "No one's going to hurt you anymore." Her chapped lips parted, but no sound came out. Preston gently lifted her from the wagon, her body frightfully light in his arms. She flinched at his touch, then went limp, either from exhaustion or surrender. Cooper approached, his weathered face grim. "Henderson claims she's an orphan he took in, says she tried to steal from them." "And that's cause to tie her up like an animal," Preston growled, cradling the woman carefully. "Look at her, Cooper, she's half-starved." The wagon master nodded, his jaw tight. "We'll turn the Hendersons over to the marshal in Red Rock. As for the girl," he glanced at Preston. "She needs tending. Your sister's place is just 2 days' ride south of here." Preston nodded. His sister Martha ran a small boarding house in Twin Pines, and she'd know how to care for this broken young woman better than any of them could. "I'll take her," he said, already planning the fastest route. "You all continue on to the crossing." Cooper helped him arrange a small travois behind Preston's horse, lined with blankets to make the journey easier on the injured woman. Before they departed, Mrs. Cooper approached with a canteen and a bundle of food. "What's her name?" Preston asked as Henderson was being secured in one of the wagons. The man spat on the ground. "Called herself Willow. No idea if that's real. Found her half dead on the trail to Denver." "Ungrateful little. "That's enough out of you," Cooper cut him off, shoving him forward. Preston turned to the young woman now resting on the travois. "Willow," he said softly. "I'm Preston Newell. I'm taking you somewhere safe." Her eyes fluttered open briefly, focusing on him with surprising clarity before closing again. The journey to Twin Pines took longer than Preston had hoped. He kept to a gentle pace, mindful of every jolt that might cause Willow pain. By nightfall of the first day, he'd only covered half the distance, but he couldn't push harder. When he made camp, he carefully lifted her near the fire, supporting her head as he helped her drink from the canteen. "Thank you," she whispered, the first words she'd spoken. Her voice was raspy from disuse or abuse, but the sound of it stirred something in Preston's chest. "You're welcome, Miss Willow," he replied, offering her a small piece of jerky. "Can you tell me your full name?" she chewed slowly, her swollen face making the simple action difficult. "Willow Fairchild," she finally said. "I was traveling to my aunt in Santa Fe when our stagecoach was attacked. Everyone else." Her voice faltered. "You don't need to talk about it now," Preston assured her. "Rest. We'll reach my sister's place tomorrow." In the firelight, he could see that beneath the dirt and bruises, Willow was beautiful. Her auburn hair, though tangled and matted, caught the golden light, and the curve of her cheek spoke of delicate features that would emerge once the swelling subsided. Preston felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. The following day, as they approached Twin Pines, Willow was strong enough to sit up on the travois. Preston had fashioned a sun shade to protect her fair skin, and she seemed to gain strength with every mile. "Tell me about your sister," she said, her voice still soft but steadier. Preston smiled, adjusting his hat against the midday sun. "Martha's the strongest woman I know, came out west with her husband 10 years ago. When he died of fever, she took over the boarding house they'd started instead of heading back east like everyone expected. Now she runs the finest establishment in 3 counties. She sounds remarkable," Willow replied. "Do you think she'll mind taking in a stranger?" Preston glanced back at her. "Martha's never turned away someone in need. Besides, you won't be a stranger. You'll be my friend." The simple word friend seemed to touch Willow deeply. She ducked her head, but not before Preston caught the shimmer of tears in her eyes. Martha Newell stood on the porch of her 2-story boarding house as Preston rode into Twin Pines, her hands on her hips and her brow furrowed with concern. "Preston James Newell, when Cooper's telegram said you were bringing an injured woman, I expected you days ago." She called, already descending the steps as they approached. "Had to take it slow, Marty," he explained, dismounting quickly. "This is Miss Willow Fairchild. She's had a rough go of it." Martha's expression softened immediately as she took in Willow's condition. "Oh, you poor dear. Let's get you inside and cleaned up." She shot a meaningful look at Preston. "And you can tell me exactly what happened while I tend to her." Inside the boarding house, Martha's efficient care transformed Willow. A hot bath, clean clothes borrowed from Martha's closet, and a hearty meal brought color back to her cheeks. Preston waited in the parlor, turning his hat in his hands, unexpectedly nervous about seeing her again. When Willow finally appeared in the doorway, he almost didn't recognize her. Her auburn hair fell in damp waves around her shoulders, and without the dirt and blood, her face revealed fine features and a natural grace that took his breath away. "Miss Fairchild," he stood quickly, nearly knocking over the small side table. "You look recovered." A small smile touched her lips. "Thanks to you, Mr. Newell." Martha bustled in behind her, carrying a tray of coffee. "Sit down, both of you. Willow's told me some of what happened, but I want to hear it from you two, Preston." Over the next hour, Preston related the events of the discovery, filling in details that Willow had been too traumatized to notice. The Hendersons, it seemed, had been planning to sell her to a mining camp up north where women were scarce and questions weren't asked. "I didn't even know if anyone would ever find me," Willow admitted, her hands trembling slightly around her coffee cup. "After the stagecoach attack, I was alone for days before the Hendersons found me. At first, I thought they were helping me, but then..." She shuddered. Martha reached over and patted her hand. "Well, you're safe now. You can stay here as long as you need." "I can't impose," Willow began. "Nonsense," Martha interrupted. "Preston tells me you were headed to your aunt's in Santa Fe. We can send a telegram tomorrow, let her know you're alive. In the meantime, you'll rest and recover." Preston cleared his throat. "I should be getting back to the ranch. Boss will be wondering where I am." Both women turned to him, and he was surprised to see disappointment flash across Willow's face. "You'll do no such thing," Martha declared. "I already sent word to Mr. Holden that you're helping me with some repairs. He said take the week." Preston raised an eyebrow. "Did he now?" "Well, I might have implied it was urgent," Martha admitted with a sly smile. "But look around, brother. This place could use a man's touch for some things." And so Preston found himself spending the next several days at Martha's boarding house, fixing loose boards on the porch, reinforcing the corral fence, and trying not to watch Willow as she gradually regained her strength. By the third day, she was helping Martha in the kitchen, her nimble fingers quickly learning to form perfect biscuits. Preston found excuses to come inside for water or tools just to catch glimpses of her. Each time their eyes met, something warm and unfamiliar fluttered in his chest. On the fourth day, a telegram arrived from Santa Fe. Willow read it with a trembling hand, then passed it wordlessly to Martha. "Your aunt passed away last winter," Martha said softly, scanning the message. "I'm so sorry, dear," Willow nodded, her composure admirable despite the blow. "I thought that might be the case when I didn't receive a reply to my last letter. She was quite elderly." "Do you have other family?" Preston asked, pausing in the doorway with a hammer still in his hand. Willow shook her head. "My parents died when I was 12. I was raised in an orphanage in St. Louis until I was 18. When I received word about a small inheritance from my aunt, I decided to come west." She smiled ruefully. "I thought it would be an adventure." That evening after dinner, Preston found Willow sitting alone on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the empty space beside her. "Please," she replied, shifting slightly to make room. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the only sound the creaking of the swing chains and the distant piano from the saloon down the street. "What will you do now?" Preston finally asked. Willow sighed. "I'm not sure. Martha has offered to let me stay and help with the boarding house. It's a generous offer." "But," Preston prompted, sensing her hesitation, "but I came west to start a new life, to find a place that was truly mine." She turned to look at him, her green eyes reflecting the fading light. "I still want that, even after everything." Preston nodded slowly. "I understand that feeling. It's why I became a cowboy instead of staying on my father's farm in Illinois, needed to find my own way." "Have you found your way, I mean?" The question caught him off guard. Had he? For years, he'd drifted from ranch to ranch, never putting down roots, always looking toward the next horizon. "Not yet," he admitted. "But lately I've been thinking it might be time." Their conversation was interrupted by Martha calling them in for dessert, but something had shifted between them. A recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits searching for belonging. The next morning, Preston was splitting firewood behind the boarding house when Sheriff Miller rode up. "Newell," the lawman nodded in greeting, "got news about those Hendersons." Preston set down his axe. "They in jail where they belong, the man is. Woman turned state's evidence against him. Seems they've done this before 5 times that we know of. Not all their victims were as lucky as Miss Fairchild." A cold anger settled in Preston's gut. "What happens now?" "Henderson will hang, most likely." "Judge arrives next week." Miller hesitated. "We'll need Miss Fairchild to testify. I know she's been through a lot, but I'll testify." Both men turned to find Willow standing in the doorway, her face pale but determined. "You sure about this, miss?" Miller asked gently. "It won't be pleasant, recounting everything in a courtroom." Willow stepped forward, lifting her chin. "If it means he can't hurt anyone else, then yes, I'm sure." Preston felt a surge of admiration for her courage. This woman, who had endured so much, still found the strength to face her tormentor again. After the sheriff left, Preston approached her cautiously. "You don't have to do this, you know. No one would think less of you." Willow's eyes met his steady and clear. "I would think less of me. All my life, I've let things happen to me: my parents' death, the orphanage, even this journey west was because of my aunt's passing. For once, I want to choose my path, even if it's difficult." Impulsively, Preston reached out and took her hand. "Then I'll be right there beside you." Her fingers tightened around his, and something passed between them, a current of understanding and connection that neither could deny. The days leading up to the trial were tense. Preston worked himself to exhaustion improving Martha's property, trying to keep his mind off the upcoming ordeal and the confusing feelings growing inside him. Willow spent hours with Martha, learning to run the boarding house and helping prepare rooms for the influx of visitors the trial would bring to Twin Pines. In the evenings, however, they found themselves drawn together. Sometimes they talked about their pasts, Preston describing the cattle drives across the open plains, Willow sharing rare, happy memories from her childhood before the orphanage. Other times they sat in comfortable silence on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast western sky. One night, a week before the trial, Preston found Willow in the kitchen long after everyone else had gone to bed. She was kneading bread dough with more force than necessary, her movements betraying her agitation. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly, not wanting to startle her. Willow glanced up, a smudge of flour on her cheek. "I keep thinking about facing him again. Henderson, I mean." Preston moved closer, leaning against the counter beside her. "It's natural to be afraid." "I'm not afraid," she said, then sighed. "Well, perhaps a little, but mostly I'm angry. Angry that he has this power over me still, that the thought of him makes my hands shake." She held up her flour-covered fingers as evidence. Without thinking, Preston reached out and took her hands in his. "Look at these hands," he said gently. "They're strong, they've survived. And they're steady now." Willow stared at their joined hands, then slowly raised her eyes to his. Something shifted in the air between them, a tension that had been building since that first moment when he'd pulled the sack from her head. "Preston," she whispered, and the sound of his name on her lips broke something loose inside him. He leaned forward, giving her every chance to pull away, but instead she met him halfway. Their lips touched, tentatively at first, then with growing certainty. Her hands, still covered in flour, came up to rest against his chest, leaving white prints on his shirt that he would later look at with a sense of wonder. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to find you," he murmured. Willow's smile was radiant despite the late hour and the worries that had kept her awake. "Perhaps we found each other." A discreet cough from the doorway separated them quickly. Martha stood there in her nightgown, a knowing smile on her face. "While I couldn't be happier about this development," she said, "I do need that bread to rise properly for tomorrow's breakfast." Willow blushed beautifully, returning to her kneading with renewed focus. Preston, caught between embarrassment and joy, excused himself with a tip of an imaginary hat. As he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Preston realized with startling clarity that he was falling in love with Willow Fairchild. The thought should have terrified him. He'd avoided attachment for so long, but instead, it filled him with a sense of rightness, as if all his wandering had been leading him to her. The morning of the trial dawned clear and cool. The small courthouse in Twin Pines was packed, curious townsfolk mingling with those officially involved in the proceedings. Preston sat directly behind Willow in the gallery, close enough that she could feel his presence without turning around. When Henderson was brought in, shackled and unkempt, Willow's back stiffened. Preston resisted the urge to reach forward and touch her shoulder, knowing she needed to face this moment on her own terms. The trial proceeded with the efficiency of frontier justice. Witnesses were called, including Cooper and several members of the wagon train who had witnessed Preston's discovery. When it was Willow's turn to testify, She walked to the front of the courtroom with her head held high. For nearly an hour, she recounted her ordeal in a clear, steady voice. She described the stagecoach attack that had left her alone in the wilderness, the Hendersons' initial kindness that turned to cruelty, and the horrifying moment when she realized they planned to sell her. Throughout her testimony, she never once looked at Henderson, focusing instead on the judge or occasionally meeting Preston's encouraging gaze. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Even the judge, a hardened man who had presided over countless trials, seemed moved by her quiet dignity. "Miss Fairchild," he said finally, "this court thanks you for your courage today." The jury deliberated for less than 30 minutes before returning with a guilty verdict. Henderson was sentenced to hang in 1 week's time. As they left the courthouse, Preston offered Willow his arm. "You were magnificent in there," he said softly. She leaned against him slightly, the only outward sign of her exhaustion. "It's over now, truly over." That evening, as they sat on the porch swing watching fireflies dance in Martha's garden, Preston gathered his courage. "I've been thinking," he began, "about what comes next." Willow turned to him, her expression curious. "For me or for you?" "For us," he said simply. "If you'd want that." Her eyes widened slightly. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Newell?" Preston smiled at her deliberate choice of words. "I've saved some money over the years. Enough to buy a small spread just north of here. It's nothing fancy, a cabin, some decent grazing land, a creek running through it. I've had my eye on it for a while, but never had a reason to settle down before." Willow's breath caught. "And now?" "Now I have the best reason in the world." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I love you, Willow Fairchild. I think I started falling for you the moment I pulled that sack off your head and saw your eyes. I know it hasn't been long, and I'll understand if you need time." "Yes," she interrupted, her voice soft but certain. Preston blinked. "Yes, you need time," Willow laughed, the sound like music in the gathering dusk. "Yes, I'll marry you, Preston Newell. Yes, I'll build a life with you on that small spread. Yes to all of it." Joy exploded in Preston's chest as he pulled her into his arms, their kiss sealing a promise that neither had expected to make when fate brought them together on that dusty trail. The wedding took place 2 months later, after Henderson's execution and the arrival of autumn's cooler temperatures. Martha transformed the boarding house for the occasion, filling every available space with wildflowers and ribbons. The entire town turned out, curious to witness the union of the quiet cowboy and the brave young woman whose story had captured their hearts. Willow wore a simple dress of pale blue, with flowers woven into her auburn hair. Preston, uncomfortable in his best suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him on Sheriff Miller's arm, the lawman having offered to give her away in the absence of family. Their vows were straightforward but heartfelt, promises of love and devotion that neither took lightly. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to Martha's eyes and approving nods from the hardened cowboys who had worked alongside him. The celebration lasted well into the night, with dancing and feasting and more than a few emotional toasts to the couple's happiness. As the evening wound down, Preston led Willow away from the festivities toward the wagon that would take them to their new home. "Are you ready, Mrs. Newell?" he asked, helping her up onto the seat. Willow looked back at the twinkling lights of Twin Pines, then forward toward the darkness where their future lay. "I am," she said, her voice firm with certainty. The journey to their homestead took less than an hour. When they arrived, Preston lifted Willow down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms to carry her across the threshold of their small cabin. Inside, he had prepared for their arrival. A fire was already burning in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the simple furnishings. Fresh linens covered the bed in the corner, and wildflowers stood in a jar on the table, touches that revealed the depth of his care. "It's not much," Preston said, suddenly nervous as he set her down, "but we can improve it together." Willow turned slowly, taking in every detail of the place that would be their home. "It's perfect," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "It's ours." In the years that followed, the Newell homestead flourished under their joint care. Preston's knowledge of cattle and horses, combined with Willow's unexpected talent for garden growing, created a prosperous small ranch. They added rooms to the cabin. As their family grew, first a daughter they named Hope, then twin boys who brought joyful chaos to their once quiet home. Martha remained in Twin Pines, running her boarding house with the help of a young widow who eventually became like a second sister to her. She visited often, spoiling her niece and nephews shamelessly and teasing Preston about the gray that began to appear at his temples far sooner than hers. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Preston and Willow sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching their children chase fireflies in the twilight. "Do you ever think about it?" Preston asked quietly. "That day on the trail." Willow leaned against his shoulder, her hand finding his with the ease of long familiarity. "Sometimes, but not in the way you might think." "How then?" She turned to look at him, her green eyes as clear and beautiful as the day he'd first seen them. "I think about how something so terrible led to everything good in my life. If the Hendersons hadn't taken me, if you hadn't been suspicious, if you hadn't pulled that sack from my head." Preston kissed her gently. "Fate has strange ways." "Not fate," Willow corrected him, smiling against his lips. "Choice. You chose to investigate, you chose to help me, we chose each other." As the last light of day faded from the western sky, Preston Newell held his wife close, surrounded by the life they had built together. From a moment of darkness and despair had come a love that illuminated every day that followed, proof that even in the wild and often cruel world of the frontier, compassion could lead to the greatest treasure of all.